There are battles you don't need to win, words you don't need to answer, and moments when your silence becomes the loudest voice. Maybe you found yourself snapping over a passing comment, feeling furious over someone's cold tone, or hurt by someone's silence at the worst possible time. Even when you knew reacting would only make things worse, you still couldn't stop, because once emotions flare, they whisper that reacting is the only way to protect your self-worth. But over time, you start to realize something. When you stop reacting, you don't just protect your peace, you shift the entire energy you bring into the world. You're no longer pulled into meaningless battles, nor forced to explain yourself through pain. Instead, you begin to live from a place of stillness where everything becomes clearer, lighter, and, more importantly, no longer controls you. In this video, we're going to dive deep into a journey of transformation, one where you'll start to see that the real reason behind your reactions doesn't lie in the present, but in emotional legacies you've never had the chance to heal. You'll discover that life changes the moment you stop needing to win every moment. And when you learn to pause, you don't just regain clarity, you start to rediscover who you truly are. So, if you're tired of being emotionally hijacked, if you want to reclaim your peace, your power, and an unshakable inner strength, don't leave this video. Everything begins to change, and it starts with you. Most of your emotional outbursts don't come from logic, they come from a very deep, very old part of your brain, the limbic system. This primitive region governs emotions and survival responses. It doesn't analyze what's true or false, right or wrong. It only cares about one thing: am I being threatened? So when someone criticizes you, rejects you, or says something careless that triggers an old wound, your limbic system kicks in like you're in real danger. It can't tell the difference between a normal comment and an actual attack. To your survival brain, every emotional trigger feels the same: fight or run. And so you react. You yell, withdraw, get angry, or try to please, not because you're weak, but because your brain learned that reacting was how to stay safe. But here's the problem: most of what you're reacting to today is no longer a real threat. They're just echoes, emotional aftershocks from the past. It could be the lack of recognition in your childhood, the feeling of being abandoned in old relationships, the moments you were hurt but never got to express it, and now you carry it all like a heavy backpack, weighing you down everywhere you go. So when the present triggers that familiar sting, being ignored, dismissed, or devalued, your emotional response erupts automatically. Not because you're too sensitive, but because your brain believes it's happening again. You're not reacting to the person in front of you. You're reacting to an unconscious memory. But you don't have to keep living this way. Understanding this is the first step toward change. When you begin to recognize that your emotional responses no longer match your present reality, you open up a new choice. Instead of reacting, you can observe. Instead of being controlled, you can pause, breathe, and ask, what am I really reacting to? This isn't about suppressing emotions. It's about reclaiming your power, so when emotions rise, you don't get swept away like a victim. You step back, see it clearly, and choose a wiser response. One that's calmer, cleaner, and free of regret. Here's a truth not many people realize at first. Every time you react emotionally, you're stepping out of yourself and into someone else's story. The person who insulted you may not actually want to apologize, they just want to watch you lose control, so they feel powerful. The person who manipulates you doesn't care about understanding you, they just want you to react predictably so they stay in control. And the one who criticizes you out of nowhere may not even care whether you're right or wrong, they're just looking for somewhere to dump their own unresolved anger. But you don't see all that. All you feel is the discomfort rising, and you react, almost on autopilot. And the tragedy is, in that moment you hand over the control of your emotions and your behavior to someone else. You argue to defend yourself. You explain just to be understood. You lash out not because you mean to hurt, but because you don't want to be disrespected. And suddenly you become part of a story you didn't write. A side character in someone else's drama. Or still, you repeat this cycle so many times that you start to believe it's just who you are. You tell yourself you're hot-tempered, reactive, or too sensitive when in truth, you've just been trapped in old emotional patterns that were never seen, never healed. That is the tragedy of emotional reactivity. You're no longer responding with awareness, you're just running old scripts. You're not acting from the present, you're replaying past roles you no longer want to carry, but haven't yet learned how to release. But what if you could stop? What if, instead of instantly reacting, you paused for a beat and observed? You'd start to see, not everything deserves your peace. Not every comment deserves a reply. And not everyone deserves access to your energy. In that precise moment when you choose not to react, the power begins to shift. No one can control you anymore, not with their words, not with their behavior, not even with their silence, because you've chosen not to play a role in a script you didn't write. Silence, when chosen wisely, is not weakness, it's strength. It means you're aware enough not to be pulled into battles that don't deserve your presence and grounded enough to stay calm while others lose themselves. The less you react, the more power you keep. The more power you keep, the more aligned you become with your values. And when you live this way, you don't just avoid unnecessary pain, you begin to restore your dignity, your freedom, and the depth of your own life. Change doesn't begin when others start treating you better. It begins when you stop letting their behavior dictate your inner state. You may not be able to control how others act toward you, but you can always control how you respond. And that not impulsive reaction is where true power lies. When you stop reacting, you're not just staying silent. You're mastering your energy. You're no longer pulled into provocations. You no longer feel the urge to prove anything. You stop defending your emotions. You choose stillness, and in that moment, you shift from being affected to becoming the one who steers. You start to create a small but powerful space between stimulus and response. And in that space, you find yourself again. You have enough room to ask, is this really important enough for me to react right now? Will this reaction help me become a better version of myself? Am I responding to this situation or to an old wound inside me? When you ask those questions, you begin to shift from unconsciousness to awareness. And from that space, you stop being a ball kicked around by circumstances. You become the one who chooses. And sometimes that choice is to do nothing at all. Silence is no longer surrender, it's a conscious decision. Calmness is no longer naivety, it's wisdom sharpened by past pain. And the lack of reaction doesn't mean you don't feel, it means you've chosen not to let emotions define who you are. From that point on, everything begins to change. People who once controlled you through emotions realize they no longer have that power. Situations that used to drive you mad become mere observations. Conversations that once drained you become short, clear, and no longer hurtful. You don't have to force your way to reclaim respect. You just stay calm, because the right kind of calm always makes people recalibrate their behavior. And that's when it becomes crystal clear. When you stop reacting like before, you don't just change the world around you, you begin to change the relationship you have with yourself. You don't need to announce to the world that you've changed. When you've truly stopped reacting emotionally, the change radiates on its own quietly, but unmistakably. And those who once relied on manipulating your emotions, they're the first to feel it. The first sign is the calmness in your eyes. You no longer flinch at provocative remarks. There's no impatient look in your gaze that says you're itching to clap back. Instead, your eyes become steady, grounded, as if you're seeing through the situation, not just into it. You're not avoiding it, but you're no longer caught in it either. The second sign is your ability to be silent intentionally. You don't rush to reply to hostile messages. You don't feel the need to say the last word just to close something. You've learned that silence isn't quitting, it's a deliberate act to preserve clarity and conserve your energy for what actually matters. Then, you start walking away from battles that were never yours to fight. When someone blames you unfairly, you don't scramble to explain. When someone tries to manipulate, you don't fall into the trap of emotional decoding. You stop needing to win every argument because you understand it's not necessary for others to get you. What matters is that you no longer let the fear of being misunderstood control how you act. You observe more, speak less. Not because you're shy, but because you've realized those who truly see you don't need many words. And those who choose not to see won't hear you no matter how much you say. Finally, the most powerful sign: you no longer seek revenge. Your inner peace becomes so precious that you refuse to trade it away just to win a petty argument. You no longer crave being right because you've chosen something even more powerful, preserving your inner freedom. These changes might not be visible to everyone right away, but you will feel them first in the lighter breaths, in the steadier heartbeat, in the way you sleep more deeply, and in the quiet realization that I've stopped chasing, stopped resisting, and stopped reacting to things that are no longer worth it. And that is the beginning of a quiet but unshakable kind of strength. When you begin to pause before every emotional reaction, you're not just building calmness, you're rewiring your nervous system for stability. You might not notice it immediately, but every time you react impulsively, your body enters a state of alarm. Your heart beats faster, your breathing becomes shallow, your muscles tense up, your entire physiology believes it's facing a threat. Each time you get angry, hurt, or anxious, your nervous system fires up like it's fighting to survive. But when you pause, breathe slowly, and don't react, you send a different signal to your body: we're safe. And that small shift allows your entire nervous system to relax. Your heart rate slows down. Your body stops burning energy in defense. Your mind becomes clearer, no longer clouded by adrenaline and cortisol. That is the beginning of deep inner healing. When you stop reacting, you're not just avoiding unnecessary wounds, you're reconstructing your emotional foundation. You're no longer tossed around by every emotional wave. You become solid like a rock. Emotions still rise and fall, but you don't get swept away anymore. From there, you'll begin to notice subtle but powerful shifts in your life. You'll sleep better because your mind no longer replays arguments or misunderstood words. You'll listen better because you're not burdened by the urge to defend or prove. You'll speak less, but every word will carry more weight because your words will no longer come from wounds but from what? You might even notice that your quiet presence begins to change how others behave around you. You won't need to raise your voice, condemn, or lecture just by showing up with calm strength. Manipulators will hesitate, disrespectful people will back down, and genuine people will feel safer around you. That's a kind of power that doesn't come from titles or volume, it comes from being unshaken within. And the more you hold this state, the more you'll come to realize this profound truth: peace is not the prize you get for winning the argument. Peace is what you discover when you no longer want to take part in it at all. There's a quiet fear many people carry when they begin learning to stop reacting emotionally. If I stop reacting, am I becoming numb? Am I shutting down my heart? The answer is no, not if you're practicing from a place of awareness. Emotional detachment doesn't mean refusing to feel. It means refusing to be controlled by your feelings. It's not about disconnecting from the heart, but learning how to keep your heart strong enough not to be swept away every time emotions rise. A numb person cuts off emotions at the root, suppresses them, and denies the presence of sadness, anger, or pain. They run from emotions by denying them, avoiding them, or rejecting all emotional connection. But someone who is emotionally mature does the opposite. They feel everything deeply, but they don't react impulsively. They recognize when sadness arises, they allow the tears to fall, but they don't let it dictate their choices. They notice anger bubbling up, they sit with it, but they don't turn it into an attack. They still connect, still love, still hurt, but they don't lose themselves in any of it. That is the deepest form of emotional maturity. You are no longer ruled by emotions, but you don't have to shut down to protect yourself. In fact, only when you learn to detach from reaction can you truly connect from a healthy place. Because when you're no longer speaking just to defend your ego, you begin to speak what actually needs to be said. When your actions no longer come from woundedness, they begin to come from clarity and understanding. That's also why calm people aren't cold, they're often the warmest. Because they feel safe within themselves, they don't need to control others. Because they understand themselves deeply, they're not in a rush to label anyone else. Because they're emotionally steady, they can stay present without being pulled under. So remember, emotional detachment doesn't make you distant, not if you're truly connected to yourself. On the contrary, it's often the people who are the most reactive, who are the most disconnected, not just from others, but from themselves. You don't need to freeze your heart to stay at peace. You just need to stop letting it be carried away by things unworthy of it. Most relationships, whether family, romantic, or professional, run on certain emotional patterns. Over time, people unconsciously fall into fixed roles. One person often becomes the source of hurt. Another becomes the peacemaker. One pushes away to gain control. The other clings on to avoid abandonment. And the emotional reactions we repeat are what keep these cycles alive. But the moment you stop reacting the way you used to, the whole system begins to shift. Because you're no longer the same version of yourself in the same old script. You no longer suppress until you explode. You no longer explain just to be understood or cry in hopes of earning sympathy. Instead, you bring a steady, grounded presence, and that alone forces others to reconsider how they engage with you. That's when the relationship begins to reshape. When you no longer react, the one who used to control you starts to realize their power no longer works. The critic notices their words now fall into silence, not backlash. The person who used to turn their back during conflict sees that you're no longer chasing or explaining. At first, this shift may make them uncomfortable or even panic because you're dismantling the emotional structure they once relied on to stay in control. But if they're mature and genuinely want connection, they'll be forced to learn a new way to relate. They relate this time, not from ego, but from sincerity, depth, and mutual respect. If they can't do that, if they keep provoking reactions to maintain control, or keep reactivating your wounds to throw you off balance, then your calm and silence will become a mirror that reflects the truth. This relationship was never about connection, but emotional dependence dressed up as closeness. That's when you'll realize what you've done is not walk away from them, it's return to yourself. Your silence is not punishment. It's a boundary, a healthy limit you consciously create to protect your inner peace. And when you hold that boundary without anger or blame, you don't just filter out toxic ties, you start attracting people who love with healthy hearts. They won't feel threatened by your calm, on the contrary. They'll feel safer, more trusting, because they'll see you don't need to be right. You just choose to be real. You no longer need to be heard, you speak only when it matters. You no longer feel the need to hold on those who stay freely. You don't react to prove anything because you understand the most valuable thing is not the comeback but the unshaken presence. Every relationship around you will change, not because you tried to fix them, but because you stopped showing up as a version of you that no longer aligns with your true worth. You might have good looks, a prestigious career, or even a charismatic way of speaking, but if you can't control your emotions, that allure will fade fast. Because true attraction doesn't come from how you perform outwardly, it comes from how composed you remain in uncomfortable moments. Emotional self-mastery is what makes people feel safe around you, because they don't have to worry that a careless word will set you off, or that a misplaced gesture will break you. They're not forced into the gray zones of guessing what you're thinking or how you're feeling. They see clearly, you don't react impulsively, you're not ruled by emotional outbursts, and that alone makes you irreplaceable. Behavioral psychology shows us people are most drawn to those who stay emotionally steady in moments where others typically lose comping. Because deep down, everyone is looking for someone who can hold steady, not through promises, but through presence. Those who know how to regulate their emotions are the ones who know when to stay quiet and when to speak. They don't raise their voice to assert power, nor do they overreact to gain attention. They show up softly but clearly, and that makes them glow quietly but powerfully. In a world where everyone is rushing to speak, quick to react, eager to be right, the one who pauses, who holds their silence when needed, who steers their emotions instead of being driven by them will stand out, not because they're loud, but because they're grounded. The kind of magnetism that comes from emotional self-mastery doesn't make people like you for a moment. It makes them unable to forget you over time. Not because you stirred their emotions, but because you made them feel safe. Not because you always agreed, but because you couldn't be easily shaken. Not because you were too weak to fight back, but because you were strong enough not to need to. And the beautiful irony is, the moment you no longer need validation to feel whole, others naturally gravitate toward you. Not because you chase them, but because you're not chasing anyone. Not because you do something special, but because you are fully, deeply, and unshackably yourself. No one wakes up one morning suddenly calm, deep, and immune to emotional triggers. Emotional self-mastery doesn't arrive as a lucky gift. It's the result of small choices, repeated day after day, hour after hour. You don't reach a state of mastery once and keep it forever. In fact, you'll fail often. There will be days when you get angry, say harsh things, or react like an older version of yourself. That doesn't mean you're not growing, it just means you're still on the journey. Every time you choose silence over reaction, you strengthen a piece of your inner power. Every time you take a deep breath before speaking, you pull yourself out of instinct and step into awareness. Every time you observe your anger without letting it drive your behavior, you become someone new, someone you're learning to respect. Like every sustainable habit, emotional self-mastery doesn't require perfection, it requires consistency. It asks you to reflect on your reactive moments, not to punish yourself, but to better understand who you are. It asks for patience on the path, because every small step in the right direction is worth more than a dramatic leap that collapses. What matters most is that you know how to return to yourself. That you know when to stop mid-reaction, when to step back and regain balance instead of proving a point. That you understand silence isn't weakness and speaking up isn't always strength. Because true self-mastery isn't about having no feelings, it's about no longer letting feelings run your entire life. You start choosing your responses not based on impulse, but on values. You start filtering your words not to manipulate others, but to protect your inner integrity. You start slowing down not because you lack motivation, but because you're clear on where you're going. And little by little, you'll see calmness doesn't come from avoiding emotion, but from being able to sit with it without being in the moments you sit with anger without saying something hurtful. In the moments you hold your peace instead of fighting to be understood. It's in those moments that you're training the mind and laying a stronger emotional foundation for yourself. Everyone wants to change their life, to have better relationships, deeper connections, more fulfilling work, and a life with less pain. But most people search for change on the outside. They move to a new place, switch partners, change jobs, even alter their appearance. Yet somehow they keep meeting the same kind of people, suffering the same kind of wounds, and facing the same kind of disappointments. That's because the real cause doesn't live in the world out there, it lives inside. More specifically, it lives in how you react to what happens around you. When your anger controls your words, you give others the power to steer your story. When fear dictates your decisions, you let your circumstances determine the direction of your life. When you react impulsively from pain, you're no longer in the driver's seat, you're being dragged by wounds that were never healed. But when you learn to pause even for a few seconds before reacting, you create space. And in that space, you get to choose what you truly believe is right, not just what you're triggered to do. That moment is where you reclaim your freedom. Because freedom isn't doing whatever you want whenever you want. Freedom is having the power to choose your response, and no one, absolutely no one, can pull you out of that center unless you allow it. When you master your reactions, you're no longer led away from your goals by passing emotions. You no longer let a single comment make you abandon your trust, a moment of rage ruin a relationship, or one rejection shake your self-worth. You act because you choose to, not because you're provoked. And that's when you start living with intention, courage, and depth. You're no longer defined by others. You're no longer shaken by circumstances. You're no longer stuck in old reflexes. You've become the one guiding your own path. You may not see results right away, but with each passing day, with each moment you choose peace over impulse, Each time you choose understanding over reaction, each action you take from your clearest self, all of that is quietly changing the course of your life. Not through drama, not through performance, but through the quiet power of someone who knows how to master themselves.